Good morning. Happy Sabbath. It's a good day to be here. Well, there are some of you that I've never met, so I guess I'll introduce myself once again. I'm Takuma. I'm the associate pastor of this church. I actually was here from 2015 to 18, but then I went to that beautiful state of Michigan to study further, and then just came back last year, or 2 years ago actually, right in the midst of COVID. So haven't had the chance to see some of you, but it's really good to see you all here this morning. By the way, I actually do usually have some beard, mustache on my face, but this morning I don't know what I was thinking, but I decided to go and shave it. So this is not how I usually look. I look a bit naked today, but I guess my hair will grow again. So yeah, it's good to meet you all. Some of you are doing this, but thank you. All right, so yeah, let's continue with the sermon. So for those of you who are new to this series, well, I've been actually doing a series called The People of God and the Gods of People on idolatry, worship, and being Christians. And this series actually has been too long, maybe, for some of us. This morning's will be the 16th installment. But the basic thread that went through all these sermons is to the question of how come in the Bible there are so many instances of people worshiping gods made of woods and stones and other materials, right? And I was talking about this issue of idolatry, especially as pertinent to those who profess to believe in God, who cannot be represented by any of those things. And this morning, I will be getting into another instance or story in the Bible that has to do with idolatry, but this time, this is not primarily with the people of God themselves, but how the people of God faced the prevalent idolatry in the society of that day. Now, for the last two sermons in the series, I've spoken from the Gospels. I've spoken from, or taken from the words of Jesus that were pertinent to idolatry. But this time we go beyond that and we get into the book of Acts. And by the way, one of the reasons why this series is taking so long is because I only preach this series once a month or so. But this time I will be getting into Acts chapter 17, and next time I think I will get into Acts 18, although I cannot promise. So this morning, our primary text will be Acts 17. And this is a voluminous passage, and I will read every verse, not the entire chapter, but that is of the story. But hopefully you will find it fun and interesting as I did studying this passage. So let's get right into it. Acts chapter 17, verse 16 begins with these words. Now, while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. Where is Paul? Paul was found in Athens. Now, Athens was a great city. Okay. It was known for its art and beauty and architecture, religion, gods, and intellects. Like many philosophers were in Athens several hundred years ago. But in any case, Paul was not really planning to be in Athens. He was driven out from another city because some people were unhappy hearing Paul's message. So he happened to be in Athens, and he was waiting for his company to join him to go further. However, in this city, it says that his spirit was provoked within him. Okay? Because he saw that the city was full of idols. And there are many historical records that show, and you can still go to Athens and see those great architectures and idols that Paul must have seen. But in any case, Paul's reaction was not, wow, these are beautiful, wow, these are grandeur, right? His spirit was provoked. And on this point, David Peterson writes, this terminology, that is, his spirit was provoked within him, is regularly used in that is 70. That is another word for a Greek translation of the Testament, to describe God's reaction to idolatry. Paul shares something of the jealousy of God for his own name or character. Now, I talked about God's jealousy as being very important to this theme of idolatry in the very beginning of the installment, which I know that many of you remember. Here, Paul shares in that. And I wonder how many of us would feel that same jealousy like Paul did when we encounter those things that entices people to broadly calling idolatry, right? But since he was provoked, continue reading, so he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Now, it was customary for Paul to go to Jewish synagogues to talk to the believers, right? But he, in addition to that, in Athens, he went to the marketplace every day and just conversed with whomever was there and shared, right? I don't know where this marketplace would be today. It could be mall, I don't know, could be a downtown. Wherever people would come, he just went there and spoke. And that for sure attracted people's interest. So some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him. So it's not just uneducated people that spoke with Paul, but even those of the intellects of well-cultured people too were attracted to what Paul was saying here. And I'm sorry, for time's sake, I won't be able to really talk about the Epicureans and Stoicism and Stoics and all that. But if you would Google and see what they believed in, this might really add to what Paul is going to share in understanding. But in any case, I think these people are still cool, and people still have a lot to learn from them. And I'm not really necessarily advocating their philosophy per se. But if you would just Google, for example, Stoics on YouTube or podcasts or even Amazon, you would find many modern revisiting of these thoughts, and many people actually following in them because they find some wisdom in them. But in any case, these were no dumb people, okay? And they conversed with Paul. And some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" And others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection." So there were diverse reactions to that. Some said, crazy, right? And others were like, okay, maybe he's talking about a new kind of religion. And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting. For you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean. Now, in contrary to some of those places where people just got angry and brought mob and driven Paul out, these well-cultured Athenians said, although some of them scorned at him, we'll give you a hearing, right? We want you to actually officially speak of what you are proposing. So they brought him to Areopagus. Now, Areopagus, maybe in some of your Bible might translate it as Mars Hill or Hill of Mars. There was a hill that was named Areopagus where people would meet. And this meeting place was actually a meeting place for the council of the city. So we do not know if this Areopagus referred to the actual location or of council, but Paul was given this opportunity to share, although he was really, planning for that. And this is just a side note, but the way this writing is framed is very much evocative of the story, the trial of Socrates, if you know. Paul is almost depicted, and maybe intentionally by Luke, as though he's the new Socrates, and that builds up the tension, but I'll just leave it out there, okay? But in any case, these were happening and the stage was set. And I find this comment by Luke very interesting. It's almost sarcastic that he writes this. But the reason why the Athenians provided for this opportunity for Paul was, in Luke's words, now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. They wanted to know the newest trend. And that was the only thing that they were doing. Of course, this is an exaggeration, I think. But Luke saw it that way. And one of that, as I was studying this passage, that really made me curious was how much today's society that we live in is like the Athens some 2,000 years ago. Like the people of our present age, maybe including us, would spend our time in nothing except hearing something new, right? And I think just by the fact that observing yourself, how many times you touch your phone, whether to check the news or media or SNS or text message or even email, like we will see, objectively speaking, how much obsessed we are with what is coming up, what is new, right? We cannot be settled with yesterday's information. We want minute by minute, second by second update, and that was how the Athenians were. And there, Paul saw an opportunity to share the gospel, right? And I find a bit of a hope in today's very secular, post-Christian, post-religious, post-theistic day, because we're still obsessed with new things, right? And I believe that, as Paul will show here, there is a new way of, new words that may be given to this Christianity, to this religion that may be of old age. And there, maybe we can also speak to the Athenians of the day. But in any case, Paul gets into this, steps into Areopagus, and he's given this opportunity to share the message. And here comes the message, the content of his sermon. Now, I will not be able to do justice to this profound message, but I hope we'll be able to get the gist of it. Okay? So Paul begins by saying this. Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious." You are religious. You are indeed very religious, says Paul. Okay? Now, I don't know if he meant it in a commendable fashion or more of an ironic fashion, but he saw that these people were very much spiritual, although they were very intellectual, right? And he goes on and says, "For as I pass along and observe the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, 'To the unknown God.'" Now, as we've seen earlier, Athens was full of idols, and some writers outside of the Bible even depicted this prevalency of idolatry as Athens as the forest of idols. But amidst that, Paul found this one interesting inscription, an object dedicated to an unknown God. And there, Paul found a touchstone or touch point, in that the Athenians were so religious that even though they knew not which god they were worshiping, they still worshipped. Right? And this inscription might have, as one of a few of the commentators were suggesting, from a time of plague before Paul's time. These people would sacrifice to God to appease their gods, right? To please their gods. But in this one plague, none of the altars did the job of appeasing the god or ceasing the plague. So they started building this altar to an unknown god. So somehow, somewhere, whomever God may be able to stop the plague. And that might have been the reason why one of these objects or altars were made. But in any case, these quite sophisticated people of the day were still religious, were still spiritual. They were still drawn to something that was more, that was beyond them, beyond their conception, beyond even their labeling or naming what that is. Right? And on this point, John Calvin, the great reformer, in his commentary, writes, and sorry for the old English, but Paul doth not in this place commend that which the men of Athens had done, but taketh from their affection, though it were corrupt, free matter for teaching. And I find this Calvin's comment interesting. And why I find it interesting is because, he thinks that Paul is not necessarily commending the Athenians for their religiosity as a whole. But Paul found something that he could connect with. Something that has to do with Christianity. And that was their affection for something beyond them, for something higher than them, for something that was incomprehensible to them. And from there, he was able to speak, "What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you." And I think that even today, people do have this kind of affection, this kind of longing for something that is beyond their control, beyond human, right? Yes, we have grown out of these old religions and grown out of gods and all that we say, right? In this scientific age, we think that we've conquered, right? We've mastered what we can. And yet, for example, like today, when we see the war, which is out of our mastery, which is out of what some might think of human reasons and justice and all that, we are confronted with something that we cannot really put under ourselves, right? And at this moment, we see that we have something for more. We have something of an affection that cannot be satisfied with the present moment, with what we've attained so far. And in that moment, Paul saw that there could be a connection, there could be a bridge between the Athenian idolatrous people and Judeo-Christianity, to which he was a part of. Right? And so this unknown God to whom they were offering worship, he starts to expound who this God is. The God, this unknown God, who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by men, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. So he starts to offer maybe a covered critique of what was so prevalent in the Athens, right? Where there were many temples and altars dedicated to various gods. Paul starts out by saying, actually, this God doesn't need a temple or doesn't need a human hand to be served. Why? Because he actually is the one who created everything, and he actually is the one who sustains everything, and he actually is the one that sustains your breath who think that you need to somehow support and give life to God. Right. And this notion actually was not contrary to the thoughts of the Epicureans or the Stoics. They too thought it foolish that God needs human hands to sustain himself. And I'm sure that the people of today, of this modern day, would think that if God needed us, he's not worth worshiping or serving, right? And I think as Christians, we too agree on that point, don't we? And yet I wonder, sometimes we, well-intentioned Christians, might present our God as somehow needing our hands. When we, for example, say that God needs us and our missionary endeavor for him to let his kingdom come, or for our political action or whatever else that we need to do in order for God to bring his heaven. Or more specifically for Adventists, we might sometimes present as though God needs some vindication by us becoming a good people or by us becoming perfect. And those well-educated secular people will be like, if God needs us to do something for him, why would we even worship him as God, right? And I think they've got a point, right? Because if there's anything that we could offer God, it is not because he needs it, but it is because out of his grace, he has provided us with something that we can offer him. Right? And that offering itself is a gracious invitation by God, showing that we need him. And here Paul found a place that he could agree with these intellectual people of the Epicureans and Stoics. That God needs not us, but we do. And this God is the God above all these idols that the Athenians have made. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. So this God actually made all men from one man, which in Paul's mind referring to Adam and Eve, I believe. But from there we've come. So there is a common ground for both Paul, a Jew, and the Athenians. And here he says of God as determining allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. Okay. Which is an interesting expression that he uses of how people are scattered around the globe and have lived in different ages. Right? But the fact that we live in different places and we live in different times or throughout moving seasons is not by chance, but according to Paul, was actually intentioned by God to happen this way. And this was done, as Paul says, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. The reason that people are scattered around, the people live throughout history and season, is so that they may be able to seek God and feel their way toward him to find him. And I think there are good examples of that, although I will not really get into it. I think, for example, the Tower of Babel in the book of Genesis may be a good example of the opposite, right? People getting together in one place and not seeking God, right? And therefore God had to scatter them so that they may feel a bit helpless so that they would want to seek God. Or we could look at the history of the Israelites. For example, the story of Exodus when they were placed in Egypt. Or maybe we could fast forward and see the story of the exile when the Jews were brought captive to other countries, right, including Babylon. There we see people starting to seek for God, starting to look for Him and find Him. And so here Paul is saying that even though we are far apart, even though we have, at least in a short period of history, we've come from different places, from different people. If we go back to the origin and come to this place, we actually share a lot in common. And the fact that we share a lot in common in diversity is because God wanted you to feel that they were affectionate for Him, God, though they might not have known Him, right? That they might feel their way toward Him. And to not necessarily prove, but strengthen his point, Paul quotes from their own people. Okay? He says, "Yet he is actually not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. And as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring." Now, I think you've already noticed that Paul doesn't quote from his own Bible, Old Testament, in this sermon. He actually quotes from a secular source, if we would like to call. This first words, "In him we live and move and have our being," could be a quote from the philosopher Epimenides. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Or it could be a common saying in Greek. We are not sure. We are not confident in that on that point. This second verse most likely came from Aratus, the poet. But in any case, Paul is pointing that even one of you, although you are not a Jew or a Christian, you know that we are living as a part or living in God. It's not to say that we are a part of or our God, but in a biblical sense, we live in and move and have our being in this God. Right? And we are also God's offspring, as Paul says, quoting from their own. And so what I find interesting about this is that these two verses, these poems or sayings, actually were originally attributed to Zeus. I'm sure you've heard of the Greek god Zeus, right? The god of thunder and all that. Right? But here, Paul is not saying that Zeus is the god of Israel. He's not trying to say that. He's appropriating this for his God. However, he finds that the sentiment that they had for Zeus was actually to be directed to God, and that was actually given to them by this God. And now I'm introducing you to this God who made your poets and philosophers say this. Those affections, although they were misdirected or disoriented, they were not wrong in themselves. They were actually to be directed to his God. And so he brings with full force his critique of idolatry, here in saying, being then God's offspring, we are God's offspring, whether you believe in God or not. We ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of men. Period. Right? And I'm sure the Stoics and the Epicureans and whoever else were there would say amen to that. If we were offspring of God, why should we worship stones and golds and metals? And yeah, so obvious a point, right? I mean, nowadays we do not carve up images and of golds or stones, all that, and we don't do those kinds of idolatry or idol worship. But it could be that maybe we've just traded these gold, silver stones with silicon and aluminum and all that makes our iPhones and smartphones. But in any case, it was just foolish to commit to idolatry, and they saw it, right? So what were they to do with this unknown God? Well, Paul concludes with these words. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but no, he commands, now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. And so concludes his message. And what that closing words reveal is that, as far as we can get close to God, who is not far from us, who is not far from even the Athenians, he couldn't have ended his message without preaching Jesus Christ, who was raised from the dead. Right? Which is quite a scandalous thing to say, that a man has raised from dead. But there's no Christianity without him, and there's no way of reaching this unknown God without going through this Christ who has died and yet raised. Right? And hearing this, these were the reactions. Now when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked. Now you scientific people of 2022 might think that all these ancient people were able to believe in God because they were superstitious. But that was not always the case, okay? Even for them, even for these ancient people, for a man to be raised from the dead sounded foolish, right? So some mocked and others said, we will hear you again about this, whatever that might mean, right? I don't know if they were positively saying that or were trying to fend Paul off. So Paul went out from their midst, but some men did join him and believed, among whom also were Dionysius the Areopagite and a woman named Damaris and others with them. And so ends Paul's missionary work in Athens. And some people think that Paul's mission here was a failure because he did as many converts and as many baptisms as he did in other places. But I don't know if I would call this missionary endeavor as a failure because I don't think success may be always measured by this instant conversion or seeable baptism. He did have some converts, right? And what this story to me tells is that, quoting from Ellen White in the Acts of the Apostles, with all their intelligence and general knowledge, they were still ignorant of the God who created the universe. Yet, there were some who were longing for greater light. They were reaching out toward the infinite. And I cannot but think that these words may apply to us, to those around us today. That with all this intelligence and knowledge that we've gained in the last how many years, we are still ignorant of God. And yet, there are some people there who are longing for something greater, who are reaching out, reaching toward the infinite. although they know that with their finite minds they cannot. Right? And so I would like to read from William Willimon, theologian, on this passage. Idolaters they may be, but at least they are searching. Their impulse to worship is right, even if the objects of their worship are wrong. Their religious yearning, even though a bit of a scandal to a monotheistic Jew or us Christians, is the inarticulate and uninformed yearning of the pagan for the God whom only the scriptures can disclose. Only the Bible can reveal to them what they are longing for, what they're yearning for, what they're affectionate for, and what they're searching for. So the church, Willimon writes, rather than standing back from pagan religiosity, and that I think includes those atheists or those who think that they cannot know God, instead of standing back, pointing our fingers in righteous indignation, should, like Paul in Athens, minister to their searching. And I would like to conclude this sermon with this point. That when we look around this secular world, secular society, we may feel like there's no bridge for us who believe in God and those who deny that there is such a thing as God. Right? We may sometimes be even afraid or fearful that these people might ridicule us for our primitive belief. And it is so easy for us to just be enclaved of ourselves, be closed, and just have live in an echo chamber of those who believe in God. Right? But what this story, I think, tells us is that even though they may not know of what they're saying or believing, even in the non-existence of God, there are those who are searching for. There are those who have the affection toward the God that they are yet to know of. And so in that sense, idolatry, although is trenchantly critiqued by all the prophets, even Paul in this passage, though their objects may be wrong, even the idolaters have religiosity which may be directed to the God, to the living God that we believe in. And when we think of that as a church, I think we cannot just close or break down the bridge between us and those intellectuals or those people who think that God is not, or those who think that resurrection is impossible. Because if we would converse with them, if we would see what they are doing, we might be able to find that they may be searching for something more, that they may be longing, that they may be yearning for something more. So as I close this message, I would like us to remember that in idolatry, there is a longing. And that longing may be directed to the God who made their longing living. Let us close with a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this morning. We thank you for this beautiful Sabbath in which we were able to read your word, to imagine this great story and an interesting sermon preached by Paul, and to see what this might have to say to us living some thousands of years later. And it is our prayer that we too, like Paul, may be able to recognize this yearning, this longing, this reaching toward, this affection that the people who do not believe in you, who do not profess their faith in you, might have. May you lead us to see that. And may you help us to find a bridge there so that we may be able to preach the Christ who has died for them but was raised for them. We thank you all this in Jesus' name. Amen.